Okay, folks have joined in. I am good to start. We'll do like a quick small introduction about the session. And as we all know that creativity is the essence of a fulfilling life. Like I have enjoyed a lot in my professional journey because I've been a performance artist, done a lot of work on the brand side of things and marketing and of course events as well. So it's really fulfilling to enjoy this entire process of creativity, and in order to lead a creative life, one must be willing to take a lot of risks, think outside the box, and be open to new ideas. With this session today, we are assuming that you're going to take a lot of notes and about how to lead a creative life. This session is by Anand Jha, who's the Chief Design Officer at Miko. Anand, who has carved a niche in prototyping-driven approach, his career of more than 15 years has been focused around product leadership and design. He now also mentors and coaches others towards new product development and growth. Anand, thank you so much for taking out the time to be at our event today and doing this session. We will share the story of why we are starting this 30 minutes late towards the end, but I'm not going to use more time and delay this further. Why don't we start with the session?
Absolutely, Pavan. So we can always categorize all of this into technical glitches, like the way it happens with most of the events. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, guys, before I start sharing slides, I'm speaking this to you as much as I'm speaking this to myself. We've always been in a series of challenges, right, where we do not know how our creative life is panning out. Right, we are scared that we took the wrong decision. We could have made more money somewhere else. We could probably been in the situations differently, and a lot of it is just collective reflection on it. I'm not the wisest person in the room. Maybe I've had a couple of years more working on these things than you guys. So don't expect really any answers as such. Largely, what I'd be saying comes from my own experience and taken with a pinch of salt. That said, I'll just quickly share the slides. You might see me looking down at times to look at my speaker notes. I would request your patience on that. And off we go. And there might be some random sounds also coming in. There's something on the backdrop. Something is happening. Bear with me on that. Is the slide visible to you all? Can you see?
Yes, yes, it's visible.
All right. Uh, so why am I speaking to you? Largely, it comes from three things, right? We are looking at the audience and we're talking about three sets of people. We're talking about the crafts people. These are people who've started working maybe 4, 5 years, 6 years in the career. People who came for the passion of it. They're building on their craft. You could be designers, you could be architects, you could be writer, you could be painter, you could be an animator, content creator, right? But mostly you're working alone, right? You're not responsible for other people's deliverables. You derive a lot of your identity from the work that you put out, and you hope that somewhere in the hills maybe you have a studio at the end of it where people don't really bother you and you roll out the next perfect thing. That's what the dream is, right? So I'm speaking to some of you there. I'm also speaking to people who can be called as people's managers, people who are managing other people, people whose job is to be able to orchestrate things, to be able to get meaningful work out of a collective set of people with different skill sets. And then I'm talking about sponsors, people who take risks in the market, who raise capital, who create products, services, or systems, and who need all of this orchestrated with multiple other functions to be able to eventually bring to us our daily bread. These are people who are going out and selling stuff that we make. And that is what is translating into our revenues and our payments or salaries, and so on and so forth. Uh, why am I the right person? I've been these three set of people at different point in time, right? So I've spent a lot of time thinking about my working conditions and thinking about, how do you manage business uh, outcomes with creative fulfillment, right? And what are the challenges around it? And there are generic other credentials that I think most of our speakers today will have in this lineup. So, without further ado, I'll quickly snap into the first thing. I'm speaking first to the craftspeople. This is a long presentation, and I've not really timed it, to be honest. So, at some point in time, if we run the course of time, this is all you get. there might be slides that I may not be able to touch upon. But yeah, let's function with that understanding and start moving forward. So to craft people, individual contributors, I would say the first thing is to be able to locate your practice, right? What do I mean when I say locate your practice? Uh, and I wish I had this insight when I had started my work. That see, no one pushes a designer to be designer or writer to be. Most of our parents are not pushing us to do that. No one is saying that. Listen, I'll be disappointed as a parent if you took up design or if you took up writing. They would probably be disappointed if you did not do your MBA or like any other thing that is more acceptable as a career choice. And this was way more true earlier, where design was uh, purely seen as a potential not money bringing kind of profession to what it has become now. But eventually, all of us are in it because there's a part of us that wanted to be an artist, right? And no matter how much we sort of justify to ourselves that designers are creating for other people, then it is the sole reason why we came here is because some part of us wanted to create art, whether that was performance art, that was painting, that was illustration, that was making physical products, sculpting, etc. We wanted to work with thoughts and material, right? So that is one part which I define as the expression or the identity part, right? Which is you derive a certain sense of identity from the work you do. This may not be true of a lot of professions, but it is a lot of it is true for professions like ours, where uh, there is an emotional investment that is required in your work, right? The second part is you craft a skill, right? Which is when you start dabbling into this whole expression part, you understand that just because you're interested in colors doesn't make you a painter, right? Or just because you're literate doesn't make you a writer. There are a lot of things that you need to learn. There's a series of things that you need to learn and master to be able to paint better, or write better, or perform better, or express better, right? So that largely becomes the craft or the skill that you need to pick up, right? And the last part is the market assistance, which is all of this can become meaningfully relevant to you only when it provides you livelihood, right? So a lot of us here might be deriving our livelihoods from these things. It's not a hobby. It's not something that you are doing as a side thing to your main job. You might be, but eventually, enough of us might be interested to do this as a primary profession, right? So there is market and sustenance that starts making sense, which is how do you put these two together and start functioning, right? And I think one of the most interesting things to look at this mix is that you will always, it will never be this perfect triangle. You will never have the balance between uh, the assignment that gives you perfect expression or identity. You get social acknowledgement and you are able to derive the satisfaction, or you are able to maximize your craft or skill in that particular assignment, and it also pays you amazing amount of money. That never happens. You'll always be negotiating between the three quadrants, right? You'll always have conflicts coming from a balance of these three quadrants. Sometimes it will be more skewed towards market. You'll be working on things that other people want you to work with. You might be working a lot more on your own personal projects, which are artistic in nature, but which do not sustain, right? And a lot of people who might be in this forum who may have started as explorers in other kind of professions. Maybe they were theater artists, or maybe they were writing film screenplays or so on. Sustained, then eventually decide that, listen, I need to also make some money. Yeah, I can't continue working on this, right? And there are these parts where you are able to express, you have got market validation. But what Pavan was touching upon, which is the imposter syndrome part, which is that you somehow feel that your skill is not up to the mark, right? And we live in a situation where a lot is amplified, right? A lot of people talk about a lot of things, and we keep sort of benchmarking ourselves against what is being talked about, and we constantly feel that uh, we are not up to mark. So uh, I don't really want to offer you a recipe for solution. What I want to do with this conversation is to acknowledge that this exists, right? And this is what we will keep negotiating all our lives, right? But at the center of all of these intersections is your agency, which is you are deciding what you are doing. And I think we don't really acknowledge it, that we really have a say in the matter. At times, what feels is that if I'm doing something for market sustenance, I I'm pulled into it. Or someone asked me to do it and I had no other choice, right? You always have a choice. There is an agency and you're constantly negotiating between the three triads, right? So uh, eventually I want to sort of just leave you with this thought that whatever decision you take at any point in time, consider this trade-off, right? Consider that you're looking at three separate voices inside you and you're trying to manage the conflict between three separate voices. And at any point in time, you may have the power to decide what voice do you want to hear and what voice do you want to suppress, right? And it will, each of these three things are extremely gratifying, but you might need different kinds of gratification at different points in your life. So being mindful of that becomes very important. Pawan, am I audible? Can you hear me? Hello?
Yes, yes, Anand. We can hear you
Yeah,
all clearly.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. All right. Let's move to the next slide. This has been a personal challenge for me. I can say that I was sort of borderline arrogant when I started working. uh, I was like, listen, this is my uh, vision of something, and I put in a lot of effort. And whenever there would be critiques coming from various quarters, right, I would get a little uncomfortable about it. My response was either to go inside a shell, which is just to shut up after that, and say it's either this or I'll give you whatever vegetable you want, like just live with that. Or I will be in a conflict, right? I will sort of be very vociferous that whatever input I'm getting may not make sense. And to a point where one of my profs actually in the design school that I was studying in made me crush my models and things like that. That listen, you need to go through the pain of disassociating with your output. I don't completely relate to it. It was a valid experience at that point in time, but what I feel is critique becomes a very important thing if you want to grow as a professional, right? And you need to start investing time in figuring out uh, how to find someone who critiques really well, right, and build an active relationship with them. And I've had people, some of these people have been my associates from different functions. Some of these have been people who I've reported to, some of these have been people who have reported into me, right, at various point in time. And I've set in some criterias by which I function. I'm sure these criterias vary from person to person, but I can only speak about the criteria that have worked for me, which is when you're finding someone to critique your work. This is outside of work environments, right? At work, you don't really have a control of finding a critique, but it's good idea to sort of look out elsewhere, right? And the fundamental to this process is that it is built in trust and respect, right? That the other person, you believe that the other person respects you enough to have taken the time to go through your work, and that you've taken enough, you respect them enough to receive that input and look through it. It happens a lot in academic circuits where people write papers and get it peer reviewed and all of that. And it's a fascinating way of uh, improving oneself, but it doesn't happen in industry a lot. So find someone who takes like abstract input and breaks it to specific, right? And enough of us have gone through this situation. We're presenting a logo to someone and people say maza nahi aa raha, right? So don't go for that critique, right? Find someone who says no, this probably the contrast of the elements is not very good. Probably the form of one element needs to be increased against the form of other element. Probably the colors are uh, barely contrasting. Probably there are too many elements in the logo, right? You need someone who takes an abstract input and breaks it to very specific actionable things, right? So find a critique who takes the time to do that, takes the effort to do that, right? The second part is they need to have walked down that path, right? For example, if you're getting a copy reviewed from someone, uh, you need to find someone who has written complex character arcs, has understood how a particular thing is structured, right? At what point in time, what is that structure trying to achieve, etc. So someone who's put in those hours, has put in that work, so that they understand where your bottleneck might be, right? The third part is the person is kind and patient, and that person empathizes with the arc, right? They understand that you're taking a journey. So and this happens very frequently. I could have also been guilty of it at a couple of counts where because you know, and the other person doesn't, puts you in a situation of power, and you constantly sort of try to show the other person how much they don't know about something, right? And if you find someone like that as a critique, it might put you at the back foot, right? You will not feel very confident dealing with them. So you need to have someone who understands that what you're doing right now is the first step towards what you might be doing in future, and they are able to function from a place of uh, kindness and patience, and not really bulldoze you into, sort of lowering your confidence and things like that. So this becomes very important because it interferes with your process of receiving the feedback. At times you focus on the tone than on the substance because the person's tone is a little off, right? And the last part is rationalizes the input, takes the burden to define and break down things at their end, right? Eventually, the thing with most the creative feedbacks is that they're always a function of a lot of rational decisions put together, and someone who has the control on the craft would be able to tell you what rational decisions have been taken together, right? So they're able to deconstruct something really well, right? Then after you found a critique, after you've taken that effect to them, they've given some input, spend time with that input. We go to the other box, we're talking about analysis of that feedback, right? And you could reject the feedback, you could accept the feedback, or you could defer the feedback. It's always good to have someone critiquing your work outside of your work environment, because the rejecting that feedback becomes an option, right? If that person's job is not to get this deliverable out of the door, right, that person will give you feedback without being attached with the outcome, right? And whether you reject or accept the feedback is not binding on them. So preferably have people who are outside of your work setup who can critique your work. And the third part is don't worship or fight the critique, right? Just find the relevant portions of it. uh, this becomes very important because we constantly get in the culture of hero worshipping, where if we meet someone who's a senior industry stalwart, right, and we either amplify what they say, or if there is someone who's junior to us but is saying something very relevant, we de-amplify what they're saying, right? So it's important, or sometimes we just immediately give a sharp reaction. So the good thing would be to take whatever input they are giving, deconstruct that input, try and see if there's anything meaningful, and then work with that, right? The next part is finding projects you can apply these learnings to, right? Which is, once you've received a critique, you've deconstructed it, how do you apply it becomes very important. How does it become part of your body of work? That becomes very important. How do you create a habit out of optimizing things basis the feedback that you get? That becomes very important. And the last part is assessing of change, right? Closing of the feedback loop, which is, once you receive the changes, making those changes and just seeing it once again, that does this functionally, perform better than what was there earlier, right? And some of these could be fairly subjective spaces to navigate. So you may not get it right the first time, or you may not get a clear sense of direction, but you will have to persist. And eventually, I think there is no 0 or 100% to it. It's a range, right? So you might sort of eventually, sorry, there is yeah, you might eventually have some kind of situation where you derive some degree of satisfaction with the improvement. It may not be 100%, but whatever it is, you generally acknowledge that that's sort of working well for you. This is the next one, and this is a very big theme of what I've been contemplating for a very long time, right? And this goes for most of the makers, which is, we feel that there is always an inherent value to something, and that people are not able to judge or assess that value really well, right? The challenge is that the value is a very complex phenomena, right? It always comes with a certain context, right? Where is it that you are in conversation? Who are you in conversation with? Who's on the other side of the table, right? What do they consider as value? So I think the first thing that one has to ask is, are you making something for yourself? Or are you making something for someone else? And there's no harm in taking either of the positions. But if you're making something for yourself, then the value of that largely has to be determined by you, right? You derive the value of it. And this happens a lot when we say take a formal design education or take a formal education in the background that we're working in, that we are constantly receiving feedback from people who are similar to us, right? So it improves our craft, but we never come in contact with other forces that shape our conditions, right? This is a good analogy. I just want to put this picture to sort of juxtapose, right, and give you the sense that uh, any object inherently, right, where it is putting, where it's located, will, if you're engaging with market, then the value lies in that engagement. There's no inherent value to anything in the market, right? And whatever you're making, the value of that will get determined by external forces. So first is to be able to be okay with that understanding, right? Understand that whatever you're making, the value of that will be determined by the market if you're engaging with the market. If you're making it for yourself, then that's a very different discussion to have. The second part is, when we talk about market, there's always someone who's buying. Who's that person, right? Is it your immediate boss, your design lead, or a content lead, or product lead, or is that the larger organization, or is that the customer, right? And there are always multiple people in the value chain, right? And each person is determining what is the value of something that you. So you'll have to have conversations with that person which are relevant to portray the value of what you're putting out, right? If someone, for example, in one of the markets that I'm showing to my left, someone is very price conscious, right? They have a limited budget, they're trying to benchmark things there. Eventually everything is similar to other thing, the only differentiator is the price. Then clearly the value of what you're presenting to that person is price, first of all, right? And they will function from that place. They will not see how much aesthetic one product is from another, and it's generally a mix of multiple things, but it's good to sort of deconstruct that into various factors. Think of what is the value that other person ascribes the value to, and then figure out that discussion with them. Uh, I mean, generally, one of my favorite things to do is to just go to a market where people are selling wares. Right? Uh, it could be a mall, it could be a heart, it could be anything. Right? And just look at that exchange, right? And understand how that negotiation. We are always in a similar situation. It's never a different situation, right? So uh, if we inherently feel that what we are presenting is of higher value and it's not getting acknowledged as such, maybe we are in the wrong setup. Maybe the person in the front is not the right person for us to talk to, right? So it's always that context that determines what is the value of something, right? And the second part of this thing is the value can always be changed, right? It can always be increased or decreased by changing the conditions. If you understand that certain perception drives the value, then work on driving that perception so that the value increases, right? So you can, the good part about being a creator is that you create perceptions, right? You create perceptions that therefore create value. So work on that as well, right? And the last part is that if the market doesn't value something, does it mean that something inherently does not have value? Now, this always comes and sort of kicks us in the gut, right? Which is, uh, we've made something we feel has, like, it has all the merits of being a high quality product or artifact, but somehow it just doesn't go through, right? Uh, and then we start questioning ourselves as to, you know, all this perseverance and all this work that we put, is this a disappointment, right? Am I worth nothing, or whatever I've made is worth nothing? And it's good to go through these doubts, but understand that it is the exchange that is determining the value, right? Again, that if it's not that inherently that thing may or may not have value, right? So just don't function from that place of extremes where something has very high value in the market but there's no craftsmanship to it, and you assume that because it has highly value in the market it has craftsmanship, right? Or the other extreme, that it has very high craftsmanship but there is no value in the market. uh, you would don't assume that the craftsmanship is not there. So function from a certain degree of self-confidence in the matter and understand that there is a certain exchange that will happen. A good example to give is certain professions in the market command a lot more salary because of a certain relevance in market, while other professions don't. Right? I know friends who took different career choices, much more intelligent than me, much more sharp, much more hardworking. But they're in a different industry, so they get paid differently. I'm in a different industry, so I get paid differently. Someone else probably is getting paid more at half of my experience, etc. Will get paid differently because they are in a different setup. There's a different kind of context, and therefore there's a different kind of exchange that is happening. It doesn't mean that inherently someone is better or worse than us, right? So uh, I think this will take some time to master, but brings about a lot of relief when you start functioning. It sort of secures you as a creative person, right? And I feel there is some merit in going through this in some sense. So so far with me, am I audible?
Yes, Anand, you are audible, but just like a time check also, we have like 10 more minutes for the presentation and then the audience Q&A.
All right. So I think probably will not be rushing into it because there are too many slides lined up now. What I'll do is I'll just pack whatever I can pack and leave you at it. And
Okay.
let's take question spaces, the slides that are being presented. So next one is inspiration must be acted upon, which is as an individual contributor, right? You will always uh, get inspired by things that you're seeing or things that are coming to you as ideas, and they present a very interesting opportunity for you to, improve either on craft or find expression. And if you're a creative who's aligned with market, working on market driven projects, right, the challenge is that after some time you're working on other people's ideas all the time, right? And some of these you might be aligned to, some of these you may not be aligned to. So before your creative voice starts shutting down, it's good to acknowledge it. Don't see it as a burden, see it as something that you must do because you are this way, right? And see it as a way of deriving pleasure. Don't put too much burden on it. Like uh, a lot of people I've seen go from, oh, I want to have like a lot of time to pursue my own projects, then sort of eventually going back to, no, I will do whatever it takes. Uh, and then sort of saying that if I'm putting in any effort, I should be able to make money out of it, right? And it may not always help because a lot of these things will not reward you financially, but what they bring as reward, purely from expression or improvement of craft perspective, is enormous, right? So act on it. It is perishable. It will go away if you don't listen to it, right? Do collaborations, do personal projects, right? I would call this as a creative anxiety, right? That you need to express yourself in some form, to improve on your craft in some form because the current conditions are not allowing for it, right? So do that a lot. Do it for fun and pleasure so that you don't get guilted around, I put in so many hours and nothing happened. And after some time, what happens is if you're in this profession for a very long time, you start developing a lot of commercial lens to look at yourself and your own effort. So it's important to check that and just keep it at fun, and have a kit, have a studio, find people to jam up with, but keep at it. Don't ever let go of this because this will keep you alive at a personal level, right? And the last part is you will make mistakes, right? So this largely is coming from a place where you will make mistakes in communication, you'll make mistakes in terms of putting your work in the right format possible, you'll make mistakes at work a lot, right? But eventually, what you do next, right, when you've made a mistake, that is what matters, which is the resilience part of it, which is being able to make mistake is your right, and learning from that mistake is your right. If there are
Kunal, come
no,
in.
yeah, should I stop? Hello, hello, hello.
No, Anand, no, no, you can continue.
Okay, okay. Yeah. So learning from that, taking professional setbacks in your stride and building upon professional setbacks, right? Recovering from it and focusing on what matters at that particular point in time. That becomes very important. We are increasingly in the environment of layoffs, contracts getting cancelled, contractors dropped off, and all of that. And a lot of times when we go through something like this, we feel that it is about us, right? Whereas there are much larger forces at play. So whatever happens, right, your ability to bounce back and show resilience is very important. I'll leave this thought here, and I will go to the next section if the time permits. How much time do we have right now?
We can use 5 more minutes.
5 minutes should be good. Yeah.
Yeah.
So the next set of audience that I want to speak to are people managers. These are people who are managing a bunch of creative folks. You've been in the industry for 6 7 years. You now started mentoring people, and now you're transitioning into a people manager function, right? And this is a place where a lot of people struggle, right? So companies transitioned them into people management function because they've been very good at their work. But being very good at your work doesn't necessarily translate you into an effective people manager. It's a different set of things, different set of skills that you have to be at, right? So you're doing your work really well is a comment on craft. Doing management really well is stakeholder management, being able to understand people, being able to function with people. So you will work with stakeholders that do not speak your language, right? You might be talking to someone from sales, someone from marketing. You might be talking to someone who's a product manager, an analyst, someone who runs campaigns, etc. And they might be, speaking from a different place altogether, right? So the first thing that I would recommend is framing your ignorance, right? Which is you'll always in a system understand that too many black boxes. Right? For example, my first job as a designer was to design cars for General Motors, right? And a lot of things were not clear to me, which is how do we go to a new country and release our cars, right? Who buys these cars? How do we find these people? How do we determine what is the price point that a certain car should sell on, right? Those are larger questions. There were very specific questions also, which is, for example, how does a car run, right? What is an engine, right? And a lot of these things I could answer because my background in mechanical engineering, but there were other things that I couldn't answer, right? So it's good to frame your ignorance, understand that this is something you don't know, right? And then function from that standpoint that either you have to take someone's word for it, find someone trustable who explains it to you in a certain degree of understanding that you can work with. You don't need to know all the details, you just need to know enough details to be able to function. And keep going back to your ignorance and keep sort of deconstructing it better, right? Which is sometimes I say that if, for example, if you're a team leader, someone, right, then understanding how other verticals function, understanding how people in top function, right, becomes very important because we generally see them as unreasonable people, and we see them as unreasonable people because they are not aligned to us, and they see us as unreasonable people because we are not aligned to them. And some of the times it happens because there's not a shared vocabulary, right? You made a really beautiful campaign, amazing typography, and the banner is absolutely good, the creative is perfect, and the manager comes and says कि यार वो पीछे का जो background है वो change कर दो, ये button का layout change कर दो, जो भी couple of these feedbacks that you might get, and you're like, why am I doing this, right? And that gap creates a lot of frustration, creates frustration because the person on the front is not able to explain why, right? And I think as people managers we need to be able to do that really well, which is explain the whys to people who are working with us, at the same time understand those whys better for ourselves from other stakeholders. So that becomes very important. There are black boxes that you'll go through, there are shared vocabularies that you need to develop, and at the end of it craft very elegant compromises because there are multiple trade-offs that you're making. Someone has to be satisfied at the cost of someone else all the time. So you have to figure out what is the best trade-off to be made and in whose interest and why. Right? Dwell on these things and largely just sort of engage more. Don't shut down, don't switch off, don't quit. Constantly go back and engage. Understand their rationale, and everyone would have certain reasons of doing what they're doing. Right? This next slide says people bloom in the right season. This is my favorite thing to say to people managers because I've seen them give up on people very fast or look at people very tactically, right? Constantly think of people as resources, and it once it becomes part of our conversation, it also becomes part of our mindset. So it's important to understand and go back and say that people are not necessarily the same as in accounting books they are maybe, but fundamentally people behave very differently from any material or machine that is creating value. People are uh, they have their own mind, they have their own rationale, and they can give you an amazing work if you trust in them. They can give you really average work if they don't find enough voice and reason or respect in the framework that they're operating on. right? So I would generally talk about, being patience with, having patience with people. Give them the arc that they will take, right? If you're interacting with someone right now, they are likely to change in the year 2, year 3 year frame, right? So look at what they aspire to be, look at where they want to go, and help them reach there. That is their interest, and you need to be able to do that while ensuring that the organization's interests are met. And if you frame this really well and explain this to the person, they will understand where you're coming from. The second part, and this is a good analogy that I have, is the whole seed, soil, and climate analogy, right? Which is, seed is the competence that they carry, right? That is what they bring. Soil is what is providing them to hold the ground, nurturing part of it, right? That whether they retain in the organization, where they grow in the organization, is the soil. And the environment is largely the external and internal factors that will either be nurturing or either be difficult. And there are different times when these factors keep changing, right? So you function from the place of being a soil, right? Your job is to keep the plant growing and keep the plant nurtured, and understand how the environment is to be managed or navigated. Uh, the third part to this is understanding two things, right? First, if someone is not performing very well, either there are competency gaps, which means they don't know enough, or their ownership gaps, which means that they don't want to work on certain things. Ownership gaps are always a reaction to how system has treated them, right? And competency gaps are more easily solvable if someone is interested to them. So, and that goes for all of us, right? At all point in time, if you are a new people manager, you may have jumped from being a very good individual contributor, a very seasoned professional, to now suddenly managing people, and your competency is dropped, right? Your expertise in one area doesn't make you expert in another area, right? You'll have to start from scratch there. So understand that, that competency is different for different people, and as long as people are willing to learn, they can pick up a certain skill. What is really difficult to crack is ownership. And the ownership will require you to change a lot of ecosystem related things, right? Which is how the organization looks at the individual, how your own extended team looks at the individual, and all of that, and figure out where the change is going to come from. I will stop here and go back and check on the time once again. Do we have time to persist with this presentation and look at other slides also, or should we
Anand,
pause here?
we'll have to pause here. And while people have been saying a lot about the deck, that this is a really cool deck and they would want this deck also, but sadly, like we'll have to stop the presentation here and move to the audience Q&A if that's fine with you.
That's fine with me, absolutely.
Okay, super. Apart from, and I'm going to quickly pick up some of the top questions which are voted by other members here. Um, how can you suggest, let me just put this up on the stage. Pragya is asking, can you suggest some mind mapping and brainstorming exercises? Like a lot of folks who might, just feel like, okay, I'm not motivated enough right now to do something creative, or the very famous phrase of creative block might hit them. So how exactly, you suggest them to get out of it and maybe do some brainstorming exercises?
I think a creative block comes largely, and again, I'm speaking from my experience. It may not be true for the people. It largely comes when you're too focused into something, you're too tunneled inside it, you're too obsessed with the details. I had a follow up slide later, which could have explained this well. But you have to zoom in and zoom out, right? uh, which is, for example, right now, if I'm working on Miko and I'm obsessed about some particular interaction that is happening at the voice interaction level, uh, and I'm obsessed about for 3 days, get ये आगे नहीं जा रहा, this needs to be improved and all of that. A good thing is to just zoom out of it, right? Look at the whole
Hmm.
problem in the larger space that you're operating in. Sometimes you can only get to a certain degree of clarity given the time frame that you have. So all
Yeah.
creative blocks are fatigues, right? It means that whatever resources you were drawing from inside of you, whether that was
Hmm.
your craft or your thought, you are now too tired to draw any more from it. And the proxy that you feel is that you have run out of it. Maybe you don't have more. That when you hit a creative block, you get this frustration that maybe I don't have any more to think. Maybe
Yeah.
I'm dumb, or maybe So people take it on themselves. Don't do that. It just means you're
Yeah.
exhausted, you're tired, you need rest, right? Just take a break from whatever you're doing, switch out, go do something else. My favorite thing is either to go for a run or socialize with people, right? Generally hang out, don't discuss work, right?
Hmm.
For 2 3 days, you will either come back to that same place with much better thoughts, and it depends. If you're drawing from your subconscious, it is a difficult place to be in, right?
Yeah.
Sometimes you will not have another thought coming to you for 2 months, 2.5 months, right? I know filmmakers who've made another film in the process of making the first film because they hit a certain creative block for the first film, right? So jump on other projects, see whatever's
Got it.
getting you motivated. That's also another thing that solves a creative block, which is you almost flow like a river, right? So if you're hitting
Yeah.
the dam in one place, you find something else to put your attention to, and because
Yeah.
that is flowing well, you'll eventually come back and close this also. So
Yeah.
alternate projects, etc., are also very helpful.
Got it.
uh,
This.
Brainstorming, sorry, just to put a last point there. There are a lot of tools available. You can use Coggle. That's my favorite tool for mind mapping. Or just take pen paper. I mean, I trust pen paper because
Hmm.
it's always handy. And you know what they say, that like the best camera is what you have right now. Right?
Yeah.
It's so don't obsess on tools too much. At least with the mind mapping and brainstorming, you have a post-it pen paper, you have a sheet of paper and a chart paper.
Yeah.
Those are as good, and they are adequate more than, I mean, enough tools online that you could function with. Yeah.
Got it. Okay. I'm gonna pick the one last question, and then and this is related to when in one of the slides I think it was about have a critique. Priyanka is asking, is there a bad time to get critique? What's been your experience with bad critics? How did you handle it?
I've struggled with this a lot, right? There is a bad time to get critiqued. If the project is getting tanked and someone is giving you a lot of
Hmm.
grief on it, right?
Yeah.
You've worked a lot. It's not going anywhere, and
Yeah.
you any which way is demotivated. And on
Yeah.
that note, if someone comes and starts badgering you with more feedback,
Hmm.
knowing that there's nothing that you can do with that feedback at this point in time, it
Yeah.
just feels like someone is just picking on you, right? And
Yeah.
uh, so and they might or they might not. I mean, I would not be the situation sort of, the context holds that understanding. But a good thing would be to listen,
Hmm.
and receive everything.
Hmm.
Just go with this understanding that you are collecting stuff,
Hmm.
right? And people are giving stuff. There's nothing more to it, right? It's not about you. It's not about, just listen. Take. I think one of the things that I do is when I go into any session to receive feedback, I take pen and paper.
Hmm.
That way, I start noting stuff down and I can be
Yeah.
objective. I don't have to look at their
Yeah.
face. If they're angry, they're sad, whatever, or they are just being purely arrogant.
Yeah.
I'm focusing on the paper and I'm focusing on what I'm hearing. I'm not focusing on them. So I'm able to
Yeah.
note down whatever they've said. Uh,
Yeah.
the other person also gets a sense that they're being heard, right?
Yeah.
So I do that a lot. And then whatever I've taken, I do not commit immediately. If I'm
Yeah.
badgered into committing, I will take my
Yeah.
time to figure out whether I need to be, whether I'm in the position to commit or not for a change in
Yeah.
the feedback. So I
Yeah.
buy whatever time that I can buy, right? It could be half an hour to
Yeah.
like 2 days, depending on what is the amplitude of feedback, right? And then I start deconstructing the feedback a lot. As someone who was managing a team of creatives earlier, I would be taking feedback on their behalf, which would have been vague, and
Hmm.
again, like translating it to very specific feedback and then
Hmm.
giving it to people. And I've also seen or learned from other people on how to give feedback better. So
Yeah.
sometimes I, in a better setting, I go and tell stakeholders, listen, if you communicate to me things in this manner, I would be able to understand it better. And now that I manage a lot of managers who then work with their teams, I constantly go back and tell them that a pure professional respect, if you are a creative, is to go to another creative and give them very specific inputs. Please don't go
Yeah.
and say shit like, this is not working for me, this is not kick ass, I'm not happy with it.
Yeah.
It
Yeah.
doesn't, I don't really care about your opinion, right?
Hmm.
What I care about is if this opinion can translate into something actionable for me. If you're not doing that, then you're constantly going to keep iterating until someone likes it. And it's a bad situation for someone working on this side as well, right? That they are just working into darkness, and they're not trusted it at some sense, right? You're just asking people to make infinite iterations until you make up your mind to. So with
Yeah.
freelancers, I will tell them, charge for iterations, accept two three
Hmm.
iterations. Don't give a open pass to people to keep making their mind at your time and effort. Don't do that.
Hmm.
And moment you restrict iterations, they'll start taking iterations seriously,
Hmm.
right? And
Yeah.
this I tell managers also, that make clear terms of what is acceptable or not when you're
Hmm.
discussing creative inputs with someone else. There's a lot of ambiguity, right? You don't know what you're making is a Taj Mahal or an apartment, right?
Hmm.
But it's not that wide. There is a range that you're functioning with.
Hmm.
So try and have that discussion on how do they define acceptable. It
Hmm.
may not be pixel level accuracy, but it might still be something that will align you guys better. Put it
Yeah.
in a document, and then that document serves as a guiding arrangement, right?
Yeah.
Go back, right? And sort of try and refer to that doc when they're being unreasonable, right? That is the agreement you've had with them. They will have to abide by that because they accepted it.
Yeah, yeah. I think that's a great advice for not just creators, but anybody who's reporting to any managers or managing a team. Just how they can take feedback, and because it has become like a important function for growth in especially the startup ecosystem. Anand, I know there were quite a few other questions also, but probably we can take that offline. Maybe some of these attendees can DM you on Twitter or LinkedIn, and get some of their questions answered. And I know I would also personally want to check out what was in the rest of the few slides in the deck. Maybe we can schedule at some point later an individual webinar or something with you. Or if you are in
Absolutely.
Bombay, we can maybe record a podcast with you at our office, and we'll figure something of that out. But thank you so much for your time today, and walking us through your deck and answering the questions also by audience. Any last closing thoughts if you want to share before we end the session?
No, thanks a lot for the opportunity. I generally give talks on technical stuff. So it was good for me for once to break out of that mold and discuss conditions of work, because we all keep getting impacted, right? And
Yeah.
I think there is enough merit in giving it a collective thought, and look at how can designers continue believing in themselves, continue
Hmm.
having a creative life, continue sustaining financially, and yet not sort of feel drained or
Hmm.
humiliated by the market, right? And this is
Yeah.
something that we constantly keep facing, right? So
Yeah.
very important to work on that relationship with yourself and with the environment that you operate in,
Yeah.
and figure out what is how do you solve this for yourself. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. People in the chat are also saying, okay, I read a message about they would have loved to see the full deck, and people are also curious to know what was the delay story. So we'll tell you the delay story and the rest of the deck maybe in the next time when we do a webinar. So you'll have to come and attend that webinar as well. But at the moment, we'll have to call this as a close for this session. But once again, Anand, thank you so much for giving us your time today, and it was really, really insightful about what all we spoke today. And I know people in the chat are going to be a little disappointed we not sharing the delay story, but I promise we'll schedule another webinar or a podcast session with Anand very, very soon. And that's what we'll start the session and the podcast with, about this delay story.
Right,
Once
something to
again,
look forward to. A good segue is
yes.
always good. Yeah.
Once again, thank you so much, Anand, and thank you so much, everybody, for very intriguing questions and being engaged in the chat. We'll see you at the next session where we are going to talk about metaverse and Web3. So be there at the stage 3 where you'll get to be part of some of these sessions. Thank you so much, Anand, once again. Bye bye. Take care.
Thanks a lot. Bye bye. Take care. Thank you guys. Bye bye.